Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 2022 Municipal and School Board Election Candidate Night. Here with us tonight is Miss Diane Ploss, the Regent's Provincial Municipal Advisor. She will be providing us a presentation and answering questions at the end. For those viewing at home, you are welcome to submit questions live to clerks@pelham.ca. Thank you very much.
Again, my name is Diane Ploss, and I'm from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and I'm the Municipal Advisor covering Niagara Region. Lucky me. Attending along with me today is one of my colleagues from the Ministry, Sav, and she will be helping me present to you today on candidates, third-party advertisers, and school board trustees election information. I would like to thank the Niagara clerks for inviting us for hosting this candidate and third-party advertiser information session. And I do have to say, this is one class act here, because this is probably the best organized candidate session we've been to in a month. So thank you, folks, for pulling this together. And I think Holly has a lot of responsibilities here. I also want to congratulate you for taking interest in your community and your local government. That's important. Next slide, please. This slide is an information slide. These slides are meant to be a summary of the legislation and should not be relied on for legal or official purposes, and we will not cover every aspect of municipal elections. We hope this session will provide you with a better understanding of the process, the legislation, and provide you with a comfort level about what you are about to undertake. I want to stress that we are not lawyers and that you should always consult the legislation and seek legal or other professional advice when necessary. Before we begin, I want to mention a few things. The Ministry has available a candidate, voter, and third-party advertising guides, as well as the regulation election forms on the government website. We have links at the end of the presentation for you, and I understand this presentation will be uploaded to election websites for each municipality. Please make sure you check your forms and make sure that you have 2022 forms. I understand some folks have been downloading the forms early and may have a 2018 form in their possession, so please double check. If you have any questions regarding topics included in this presentation, please call me. My contact information is at the end. If you have questions with regard to the integrity of the vote, nominations, those types of things, you should direct those, sign bylaws, you should direct those to your local municipal clerk. On some slides, I may give you a high-level summary, and on some, I may dive deeper and give you a little bit more challenging information. You will also note that we will be repeating some information throughout the presentation. These are important pieces of information from the Municipal Elections Act, tips and reminders. Next slide, please. This is the overview slide, and this is the topics that we are going to cover throughout our presentation. We are going to hold all questions till the end, so you may find yourself wanting to ask a question. I would recommend that you jot it down so by the end you haven't forgotten what you were going to ask. That would happen to me. Often your question will be answered during the presentation. When we do the question and answer session, we will not necessarily be able to comment on specific matters related to your specific campaign, but we will give you general and Elections Act information. If we can't answer your question tonight, then we will find a way to get the answer back to the clerks, and they can deliver those out or post those on their website. The legislation does not address election signs, and I think I mentioned you will need to check in with your local municipality responsible for your election to find out specifically what those election sign rules are. You may also need to connect with the Niagara Region to find out what those sign rules are. At this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to my colleague, Sav.
Thanks for that, Diane, and good evening, everyone. So I'm going to get right into the presentation. We have a lot to cover today. So Section 2 of the Municipal Act stipulates that municipalities are created by the province to be responsible and accountable governments with respect to matters within their jurisdiction. As many of you are planning to become council members, you may want to take a quick scan or an in-depth read of the Municipal Act for more information on the powers and duties that a municipality has. On the second last slide of this deck, there is a link to the relevant pieces of legislation that Council would refer to. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates the relationship between Council and staff. Before we get into the information about campaigning, in the next few slides, we are going to briefly touch on the role of the Mayor, the role of Council, and the role of the municipal staff, and the relationship between all three, which are key for an effective and efficient local government. We encourage you to read these slides in more detail at your own leisure. Next slide, please. Council has many roles, which are listed in this slide as well that they are found in the Municipal Act. Some of the roles include maintaining the financial integrity of the municipality, ensuring the accountability and transparency of the operations of the municipality, and determining which services the municipality will provide. Next slide, please. Council also conducts meetings, passes bylaws, and develops policies. It's important to remember that these decisions are made as a collective group, with all members of Council, including mayors and deputy mayors, only having one vote, and the affirmative outcome becomes the strategic direction for staff. I mentioned that the Municipal Act sets out the many responsibilities and limitations for Council. Your municipality's procedural bylaw will also outline the specific policies that the municipality you're running for has adopted when it comes to making decisions at Council meetings. So again, that's another document that you may wish to refer to better understand your future role as a councillor. And the procedural bylaw can be found on your municipality's website, or you can reach out to the local clerk's office for that. Next slide, please. I previously mentioned that although all decisions must be made as a collective group, there are some differences between the role of the mayor and councillors. The mayor is the figurehead for council. So again, that doesn't mean they can make decisions by themselves, but they do represent the municipality at official functions, preside over council meetings so that business can be carried on efficiently and effectively, and provide leadership to council. Next slide, please. Mayors also promote the purposes of the municipality and are key figures in public involvement. Next slide, please. The role of staff is set out in Section 227 of the Municipal Act. A key feature of effective and efficient councils is a well-developed understanding of the council-staff relationship and the role of each party. As we discussed, council provides direction, but staff implements council's decisions, and they do that by establishing administrative practices and procedures to carry out council's decisions, undertaking research and providing advice to council on policies and programs of the municipality, and carrying out duties as required by legislation or other duties assigned by the municipality. It's important for you to know that some municipal staff positions, including those of the clerk, the treasurer, the chief building official, and fire chief, have statutory obligations, and it's important that council does not interfere with the statutory obligations of these roles. Next slide, please. The function of the CAO, or Chief Administrative Officer, within a municipality is similar to the role of a Chief Executive Officer in a business environment. The CAO is responsible for the general control and management of the day-to-day operations of the municipality, which may include developing and implementing appropriate internal administrative practices and procedures to ensure the efficient, effective, and accountable operations of the municipality. To help understand the role of the CAO in a municipality, picture an hourglass. Council is on one end and municipal staff are on the other end of the hourglass. The CAO is in the middle, and just as sand must pass through the smallest part before getting to the other side, information must flow through the CAO. So if council wishes to provide communication to department heads or the clerk or the treasurer, it would go through the CAO. And if staff wish to provide information to council, again, it would go through the CAO. So it's a very important role. Next slide, please. It's also important to understand the role and responsibilities of an elected official, which is why the next few slides are included in this presentation. However, today's session is focused on campaigning, and we have a lot to cover. So I'm going to quickly go through the next few slides pertaining to your potential future role as a councillor, but I encourage you to read the slides later in your own time, and also refer to the Councillor's Guide, which is linked in the references section at the end of this slide deck. This slide provides you with a high-level overview of the relationship between council and staff. In general, it's the role of the elected council to represent the community and set the direction and policy for the municipality, and it's the role of staff to manage people and resources to achieve council's vision. The relationship between staff and council is interconnected, and it's important for council members and staff to respect one another's roles so they can serve the public in an efficient and effective manner. Next slide, please. It's important to remember that you will be elected by your constituents to represent their views when dealing with issues that come before council. However, your constituents will have many views and opinions, and you cannot represent all of them all of the time. For many issues, you will have to consider a variety of opposing interests and make decisions that will not be popular with everyone. You should use your judgment and decide based on the best interests of the municipality as a whole. Next slide, please. This slide outlines the general process undertaken when creating policies. Next slide, please. Another important role for a municipal council is to ensure that the municipality's financial and administrative resources are being used as efficiently as possible. Next slide, please. Ontario's municipalities and members of council operate under a legislated accountability and transparency framework that includes rules for the municipality and rules for members of council and local boards. Ensuring accountability and transparency of the municipality is one of council's roles under Section 224 of the Municipal Act, and it is a priority in maintaining public trust. And as councillors, you are, of course, accountable to the public as elected officials. This slide outlines the policies that council is required to adopt to support that framework. Next slide, please. Every municipality has a code of conduct that sets out the expectations and standards for councillor conduct. You may wish to look up the code of conduct for the municipality you are running for and familiarize yourself with its requirements. Next slide, please. Municipalities can have a variety of accountability officers as part of their transparency and accountability framework, including a closed meeting investigator, an auditor general, and an integrity commissioner. An integrity commissioner operates independent of council and reports to council with respect to the application of a code of conduct for members of council and local boards, procedures, rules, and policies governing the ethical behavior of members of council and local boards. Next slide, please. The Ontario Ombudsman also has a role with respect to municipalities, and more information about the Ontario Ombudsman can be found on this slide. Next slide, please. Personal privacy and other confidentiality issues are an important practical and legal consideration for municipal councillors and staff. The Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act is the primary statute for privacy and confidentiality. It sets out the rules for the collection, use, and disclosure of personal information. So with that, I am concluding the portion of the presentation pertaining to council and staff roles, and we are going to be switching gears to election campaigning, starting with the role of a school board trustee. Next slide, please. The Education Act creates 4 different kinds of school boards, which are listed on this slide. School board trustees are members of the school board, and they are locally elected representatives of the public, and they are the community's advocate for public education. Only the board, not an individual trustee, has the authority to make decisions or take action. A trustee is often the first point of contact for parents and community members who have questions or concerns about their local school. Candidates should contact the applicable school board for further information about their duties and commitments. Next slide, please. The role of a school board trustee is to establish policy direction and participate in making decisions that benefit the entire school board while representing the interests of constituents. School board trustees are accountable to constituents, the Ministry of Education, and families. It's important to note one major difference between school board trustees and municipal candidates. If a municipal candidate works in a municipality, that they cannot run in that municipality without taking a leave of absence, but they can run in any other municipality without having to take a leave of absence. They just cannot run in the municipality that they work in. For a school board trustee candidate, if you are employed in a school board and you decide to run for school board trustee anywhere in Ontario, you must take a leave of absence. Again, even if you're running for another school board that you do not work in. And if you do get elected, you may have to resign from your position. But again, for more information, you should contact your local school board. Next slide, please. In order to run for office for a municipality, you must be an eligible elector, which means you must be able to vote. So the list on this slide shows both voter eligibility as well as eligibility to run and hold office. Next slide, please. This slide lists the eligibility requirements for a school board trustee to be eligible to run. And again, questions about school board eligibility should be directed to the school board secretary. Next slide, please. Third-party advertising refers to advertisements or other materials that support, promote, or oppose a candidate, or support, promote, or oppose a yes or no question on the ballot. The meaning of third party in this context means a person or entity who is not a candidate, but is still an entity advocating for issues related to a municipal election. Third party advertising is separate from any candidate's campaign and must be done independently from the candidate. A third-party advertisement is an advertisement in any broadcast, print, electronic, or other medium that promotes, supports, or opposes a candidate, and advertisements include traditional ads as well as materials such as brochures or signs. Activities that do not involve spending money, such as discussions or expressing an opinion about a candidate, are not considered third-party advertising. Other examples include speaking to friends and neighbors, posting on social media such as Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, or sending an email to a group or mailing list that you already have. So it's when you start spending money that you need to consider whether you should register as a third-party advertiser. Next slide, please. Only the following persons and entities are eligible to file a notice of registration to become a third-party advertiser: an individual who is normally a resident in Ontario, a corporation that carries on business in Ontario, or a trade union that holds bargaining rights for employees in Ontario. Groups like associations or clubs that are not incorporated cannot register to conduct third-party advertising. Next slide, please. The first day for filing nominations is May 1st, 2022. Note that this is a Sunday, so in Niagara Region, the clerk's offices will begin receiving nominations on Monday, May 2nd, 2022. The last day and time for filing nominations for the 2022 municipal election is on Friday, August 19th by 2 p.m. If a candidate withdraws a nomination, they are still required to file a campaign financial statement covering all of the financial transactions made in the campaign. Even if you haven't spent any money or raised any funds, even if your campaign was only 2 days long before you decided to withdraw, you still must submit this financial form. However, it's very easy. You click on a box that says you didn't spend or raise money and you sign your name and it's complete. And Diane will go into more details about that later in the presentation. If a nomination is withdrawn, the candidate is entitled to a refund of their nomination filing fee only after they file their financial or auditor statement by the required deadline. In the candidate's guide, the ministry has provided a few examples showing what happens when candidates change their mind about which office to run for after they filed a nomination paper. So again, I would highly recommend that you read the candidate's guide, as it does go into detail about each of the requirements for a nomination. Next slide, please.
If I could just clarify, we don't expect you to drive to Muskoka to file your nominations. This was another slide deck. My apology. It's Niagara.
Did I say Muskoka?
No, it's on the deck.
Oh, okay. Okay. So are we on slide 28? Yeah. So starting on May 1st until the close of business on August 19th, nominations can be submitted to the clerk from anyone who meets the eligibility criteria to run for the office. Candidates must complete Form 1, the nomination paper, and submit it to the clerk along with the applicable nomination filing fee. The filing fee is $200 for anyone running for head of council and $100 for all other offices. The clerk must be satisfied that you are eligible to run in order to certify your nomination. To do so, the clerk can ask you to show identification or fill out additional forms to prove that you are eligible to run for that particular office. If your nomination is not certified by the clerk, your name will not appear on the ballot. Additionally, the nomination form must have original signatures. If you live in a municipality with wards, as long as you are eligible to vote in the municipality as a whole, you can run in any ward. If you do run in a ward where you do not live, you will not be able to vote for yourself, as you must vote in the ward in which you reside. With regard to electronic filing, we understand the municipalities in Niagara Region will not be allowing electronic filing for this election, so you may have to book an appointment with the clerk's office to file that paperwork. So just make sure you check with your local clerk's office for those procedures. The first day that a candidate can file a nomination or a third-party advertiser can register is May 2nd. Next slide, please. Municipal council candidates are required to obtain 25 nomination signatures on their Form 2 unless the municipality has less than 4,000 electors. If the candidate wishes, they can also provide more than 25 signatures, and we do recommend this in case one of your signatures or nominators end up being disqualified. Then at least you have extras that you can turn to, and your campaign won't be disqualified because you don't meet those 25 signatures, because again you got extra signatures. The requirement for nominators to sign nomination forms does not apply to school board candidates, only municipal election candidates. Nominators can nominate more than one candidate and are not required to vote for that candidate. And nominators must meet the eligibility requirements of a municipal elector at the time that they sign the nomination form. So they must be voting age and reside in the municipality, etc. In a ward system, the nominator can be anyone who is eligible to vote in the municipality as a whole, not just that ward. Both the clerk and the candidate are entitled to rely on the information provided by the nominator. However, if the nominator did not meet the eligibility requirements when they signed the documents, they can be held accountable under the penalty section of the Municipal Elections Act. So again, you may wish to ensure that your nominators know of that and to ensure that they do meet all the requirements before they sign to prevent that from happening. So again, candidates should remember that they are required to obtain 25 original signatures, even if electronic filing was permitted, and to keep those signatures until the next regular election in 2026. Next slide, please. Occasionally, a candidate changes their mind and decides to run for a different office. You can only run for one office at a time. If you file a second nomination for another office, the first nomination is deemed to be withdrawn. If you filed your second nomination in another municipality, you may want to contact the clerk of the first municipality to let them know out of courtesy. If a candidate decides to run for another office in the same municipality and they've already collected the 25 or more endorsement signatures, they can use these endorsements for the other office. If your municipality does not have a ward system and you decide to run for a different office on the same council or school board, everything from your first campaign can be transferred to the second campaign, and only one financial statement would need to be filed. But if there is a ward system, then your second nomination is considered a separate campaign, and 2 separate financial statements would have to be filed. Next slide, please. Individuals, corporations, and trade unions may register to become third-party advertisers. There is no registration fee for third-party advertisers. A third-party advertiser would register with the clerk at the local municipality, and this requires a notice of registration, and the notice must be filed in the prescribed form and must include a declaration of qualifications signed by the individual or by a representative of the corporation or trade union, as the case may be. Once registered, the third-party advertiser can advertise in support of or opposition to any candidate being elected by voters in that municipality. So this would include council positions, trustee positions, or upper-tier candidates. Any person or entity may advertise regarding any issue relating to elections in that municipality without registering. However, if you were advertising regarding a question on the ballot, you would have to register as a third-party advertiser. For a regular election, the registration cannot be filed earlier than the first day for filing nominations and cannot be filed later than the Friday before voting day during the clerk's office hours. Once the clerk certifies the notice of registration, the individual, corporation, or trade union is officially a registered third party for the election. If an individual wants to influence voters in more than one municipality, so for example, if they wish to influence the school board trustee election and the way voters in the city of Mississauga, Brampton, and town of Caledon vote, which is covered by the Peel District School Board, they would have to register in each of the 3 municipalities and conduct their activities as 3 separate campaigns. So wherever you wish to advertise as a third-party advertiser, you must register in that municipality. If a municipality believes and has supporting evidence that there has been a contravention of the Municipal Elections Act by the third-party advertiser, they can ask the third-party advertiser to remove the advertisement or discontinue advertising. Next slide, please. If an individual is registered as a third-party advertiser and they decide they want to become a candidate instead, and they file a nomination as a candidate, their third-party advertiser registration is deemed to be withdrawn, and their third-party advertising campaign would automatically end when they file the candidate nomination. However, if you are a person who works in a corporation or a trade union that registers as a third-party advertiser, and you personally decide to run and become a candidate, it would not impact the corporation, because you are different from the corporation. So for example, if I, as an individual, registered to become a third-party advertiser, and then I decide that I want to run for a councillor position instead, and I file my nomination, my third-party advertising campaign would automatically end. Now, if I worked as an accountant for XYZ company, and XYZ company decides to register as a third-party advertiser, and I decide I want to run in a councillor position, that's okay, because again, we are 2 separate entities. However, if this situation was real, I would be very careful to keep my campaign separate from XYZ company's third-party advertising campaign, because as I mentioned earlier, candidates and third-party advertisers cannot work together, and the work cannot be done under the direction of a candidate or vice versa. They must be kept separate. And finances relating to a third-party advertising campaign also cannot be transferred to a candidate's campaign. So again, using the example of if I first registered as a TPA and then I decide to run as a candidate, I cannot transfer anything from my TPA campaign to my candidate's campaign. I would have to start fresh, and they become 2 separate campaigns. Similarly, someone registered as an individual TPA or as a candidate cannot hand over their campaign to another person. So for example, if I was registered as an individual TPA, but I had to leave the country for personal reasons, I can't just assign someone else to take my place when I'm the one who registered. I would have to close my campaign down. The registration period for third-party advertisers runs until the Friday before voting day, October 21st, 2022, or the last day the clerk's office is open before voting day in a by-election. So as you can tell, I say the day the clerk's office is open a lot, so make sure you know the clerk's office hours so you don't accidentally show up after 5 or 6 p.m. and nobody's there. Again, as a candidate or third-party advertiser or school board trustee, make sure you are aware of all the dates and deadlines all the way up until December or further so that you can make your preparations. And if you're not sure of those dates, you can reach out to the municipal clerk or to Diane. Next slide, please. Campaign accounts are only required if the candidate or third-party advertiser raises or spends money. If you know for certain that your campaign will not be raising funds or you do not plan on spending any money because that's what you've decided personally, you don't need to open a campaign account. And third-party advertisers will generally need to follow the same rules for raising campaign funds and financial reporting as candidates for office. Trade unions and corporations are not eligible to contribute to candidates' campaigns, but they can participate in the election as third-party advertisers or make contributions to other third-party advertising campaigns. Municipalities must establish rules and procedures regarding the use of municipal or local board resources, and that includes the municipality's logo, the municipality's website, and municipal printers or other items. So you also want to ensure that you're aware of those rules and you're not misusing, for example, the municipality's logo, and you can do that by reaching out to the municipality to ask them for their bylaws regarding, or their rules regarding municipal resources. And again, please refer to the candidate's guide for examples of what is considered a contribution. Next slide, please. It's important to note that contributions from a candidate and their spouse are considered to have come from the same person and count against the self-contribution limit. Both the candidate and contributor are responsible for ensuring that they are following the rules of the Municipal Elections Act. So please be aware of those rules and inform your contributors so they can acknowledge that and determine how much they can contribute to your campaign or if they're eligible to contribute to your campaign. And remember, you can be taken to a compliance audit committee or even to the courts, even if you did something by accident or by a mistake or you just weren't aware. So it's a very, running for any position on council or school board is a very serious matter. And again, we will repeat information to just stress the importance of that so you don't get taken to a compliance audit or to the courts. And remember, you must issue a receipt for every contribution you receive. The receipt should show who made the contribution, the date, and the value of that contribution. If the contribution was in goods or services, it's your responsibility to determine the value of those goods or services and issue a receipt for the monetary amount. You are required to return any contributions that were made or accepted in contravention of the Municipal Election Act as soon as you learn that it was ineligible. If you cannot return the contribution back to the person who gave you the contribution, you must turn it over to the clerk. And more information about that can be found in the third-party advertisers or candidates guide. And remember that the clerk will be preparing a separate report under the Municipal Act in respect of each contributor who appears to have contravened any of the contribution limits, and again, they may face penalties under the Municipal Elections Act. So it's important that you inform contributors of their limits. When it comes to a corporation providing a contribution to a third-party advertiser, if one corporation controls the others directly or indirectly, they are considered to be the same contributor. If the corporation is owned or controlled by the same person or groups of persons, either directly or indirectly, they are considered to be the same contributor. So for example, if one person owns 3 different restaurants under the name Food Incorporated, a third-party advertiser can only accept one contribution from Food Incorporated and not one contribution from each restaurant, because each restaurant is owned by Food Incorporated. So it's considered to be one single entity. Next slide, please. This slide lists the parties that a candidate or third-party advertiser cannot accept a contribution from. Another consideration is volunteers helping your campaign. The value of services provided by volunteers is generally not considered to be a contribution. So friends distributing brochures or helping you put up signs is not a contribution. However, if the volunteer is a professional, so an accountant or a lawyer or even a baker, and they volunteer to provide you services for which they would normally be paid, the market value of that service must be recorded as a contribution by the volunteer, and it's a campaign expense for you as a candidate. So for example, if you have a friend who's an accountant and they say that they'll keep your records for you, you must list the time that they spent as a contribution. So if they usually charge $30 per hour and they spent 5 hours on your campaign, you have to include $150, 5 hours times 30, the hourly rate, $150 as a contribution from your friend and as an expense on your end. Even though you didn't pay them, he's doing it, he or she is doing it as a friendly gesture, and you're both aware of that, you still must record it on your financial form. And this is to ensure transparency in how you're spending money that you are receiving. Again, if you encounter a situation like this during your campaign and you have questions, feel free to contact Diane. As mentioned previously, only third-party advertisers can accept contributions from corporations and unions. Next slide, please. Campaign contributions are money, goods, or services given to a candidate for his or her election campaign. Cash contributions can only be accepted up to $25. Contributions more than $25 must be made by check or money order or by a method that clearly shows where the funds came from. So you must keep the following campaign records: receipts issued for every contribution, including when you accepted the contribution and the date you issued the receipt. Remember to issue receipts for yourself as well for any contributions you make. The value of every contribution, whether it's in the form of money or goods or services, and the contributor's name and address. Receipts obtained for any expense that you do incur, whether it's $1 or $100 or $1,000, make sure you keep that receipt. Any claim for payment of an expense that the campaign may dispute or refuse to pay. So even if you haven't actually handed the money over because you don't think you have to, you still need to record that it's technically owed, or maybe not. As well as the terms of any loans received from a bank or other recognized lending institution. And I would encourage you to take a look at the financial forms now to get an idea of where you will be recording this information. And if you're unsure, again, you can ask either the local clerk or Diane. Also, there's no real rule for how the receipts that you issue should look, as long as they contain the necessary information. So if you find it helpful to write little notes on them to remind yourself of, why this expense was, made, or who gave you a contribution and any specific example, you can include those notes if that helps you stay organized. Fundraising functions are events or activities held by or on behalf of a candidate for the primary purpose of raising money for the candidate's campaign. The price of admission to a fundraising function is a campaign contribution, and a receipt would have to be issued for the full amount. Money raised by events at a fundraising campaign, like a raffle or selling baked goods, also must be recorded as contributions. The contribution would be the difference between the market value and what you are selling it for. So for example, if I bought cookies for $1, but I'm selling them for $5 at my fundraising event, each person that bought a cookie contributed $4 to my campaign, and that's how I would record it. Receipts must be issued for every contribution over $25 and should contain the name and address of the contributor and the amount and date. So instead of $5 cookies, if I sold t-shirts for $50 and I bought the t-shirt for $1, first of all, payment would have to be given to me by check or money order from individuals purchasing the t-shirt, and I would have to issue a receipt and record the names of individuals who bought the t-shirts, as technically they've given me a contribution. And just jumping back to the volunteer example, I mentioned if I bought cookies for $1. If those cookies were donated by my friend who owns a bakery, again, I would have to include that donation as a contribution as well. So I would have to calculate how much that would have regularly costed me and include that in the financial forms. So it's very important that you keep these records accurate and safe. So again, if you want to keep separate notes in a separate notebook to make sure that your records are accurate and remind yourself of any details, be sure to do that. And Diane will talk more about this later, especially about compliance audits, which is the reason that we're stressing the importance of keeping these records accurate and safe. When in doubt, just record the information. Next slide, please. The limit on contributions to any one candidate or registered third-party advertiser is $1,200. The individual contribution amount has increased from $750 to $1,200, but the aggregate amount of $5,000 stays the same. So for example, in one municipality, an eligible contributor can contribute up to $5,000 to various candidates. So someone can give one person $500, they can give another candidate $1,000, they can give another candidate $300 until they reach their $5,000 limit. Then they must stop. And remember, a contributor can only give one candidate up to $1,200. Since candidates and third-party advertisers are required to inform contributors of contribution limits, you may wish to inform contributors verbally and include the limits on the receipts you provide. You may also want to just ask the contributor if they're sure they haven't reached their $5,000 limit or their $1,200 limit for your campaign, so that you're not accepting money that you will just have to return to them later on. You cannot ask the contributor, who they gave money to or how much, but you just want to clarify with them that they haven't given you more than $1,200 and that they haven't spent over $5,000 in the municipality as a whole. Next slide, please. Self-funding limits for municipal council candidates are based on the number of electors voting for office, up to a maximum of $25,000 per candidate. The formula for calculating the limit is $7,500 plus 20 cents per elector for head of council and $5,000 plus 20 cents per elector for other council offices. Again, this formula is located in the slide deck as well as the candidate's guide, so you can refer back to it at any time. The financial slides that we're discussing now can seem very confusing when you first hear them, but when you go back and read them by yourself, it may become more clear. And again, you can always contact the clerk's office or our office if you have any questions. The highest self-funding limit that anyone can possibly have is $25,000. Even if the formula works out to a number that is over $25,000, you are capped at the $25,000 limit. There are no self-funding limits for school board candidates or third-party advertisers. Next slide, please. If you decide to kickstart your campaign by self-funding it, you are able to reclaim that amount only if you have a surplus at the end of your campaign. So do not contribute to your campaign assuming that you will get that money back, because you might not, regardless of if that was your own money or a loan that you took out. If you borrow money and get a loan from a bank, the loan is not considered to be campaign income, and paying it back is not a campaign expense. It's considered a self-contribution. Again, if you do have a surplus, you can only take the money that you or your spouse contributed, not money that your mother or brother or anyone else contributed, just you and your spouse. So just remember that. Any interest that you accumulate on a loan that you may have taken out for your campaign can be considered a campaign expense. I will now pass it on to Diane to continue the campaign finances portion of the presentation, starting with campaign expenses.
Gotta get ready. I would think by now, most of you are shaking your head thinking, I had no idea. Well, you're going to get some more. We're going to be reviewing campaign expenses. Candidates and third-party advertisers should become familiar with campaign expense provisions. Campaign expenses are those costs incurred by the candidate or on the candidate's behalf during his or her campaign, or by a third-party advertiser during their campaign. Nomination filing fee is no longer an expense and is not included in the financial disclosure form. Goods and services donated to the campaign are also an expense and must be reported. A receipt must be provided for fair market value, or what it would cost for you to buy it today. Only nominated persons or third-party advertisers can incur expenses during their campaign period. Payment of any campaign expenses must be drawn from the campaign account, and a receipt providing the details and proof of payment must be obtained. All expenses must be reported in the relevant financial disclosure form to be filed with the clerk by the candidate or the third-party advertiser. Just going to go through a couple of tips and pieces of information. The Municipal Elections Act has not kept up with some of the finance advances, electronic financing and alternate platforms of financing. So first off, often we're asked about credit cards, how those should be treated. And so I'm just going to suggest when making credit card purchases, you need to keep notes and clear records showing that the expense on the credit card was reimbursed by the campaign account. The best way to do that is to write a check from the campaign account to your Visa or your MasterCard or whichever it is, and keep that canceled check together with all of the other pieces of information. The other thing that has come up in the last election was PayPal, GoFundMe, and those types of things. Again, it's not addressed in the Municipal Elections Act, so what I'm providing you is just some guidelines based on the information in the Act. Candidates are responsible for keeping complete records of each contribution. They should be able to demonstrate that they have complied with campaign finance rules should they be subject to a compliance audit. If any payment made via PayPal or check or any other anonymous format, the payments would be deemed ineligible and must be turned over to the municipal clerk. Candidates will need to ensure that all contributions are eligible. All contributions must come from individuals who are residents of Ontario and not from a corporation or a trade union. And you must be able to verify all of the details that are included in the receipt. Sorry. Another thing to keep in mind is that if you use an online platform that takes a cut of the contribution, that is a campaign expense. So if someone makes a $100 contribution and the candidate gets $98 out of it, that is a $100 contribution that should be receipted and a $2 campaign expense, not a $98 contribution. Next slide, please. Campaign expenses continued. With respect to campaign inventory, if you ran in the last election and you want to use leftover goods such as signs or office supplies, you must determine what the current market value for those goods are, or what would it cost for you to purchase them today. These amounts are recorded as an expense. Conversely, if you end up with leftover inventory at the end of your campaign and it becomes your personal property, but you want to store it, any costs of storage are not considered campaign expenses. They're your costs. Again, just a reminder, Sav brought this up, the value of services provided by a volunteer is generally not to be considered a contribution. If a professional volunteers to provide services for which they're normally paid, the market value of that service must be recorded as a contribution by the volunteer and as a campaign expense. However, you also must keep in mind the contribution limits. I know auditors are very expensive, so if an auditor or an accountant wants to make a donation, that bill may be over $1,200. So, what you will need to do is think about part of it being a volunteer professional contribution and then paying out of your campaign account for the rest. You will have to seek legal advice or accountant advice on a situation like that. Next slide, please. Spending limits. The spending limit formula for candidates and the maximum amount for parties and expressions of appreciation after voting day are set out in an Ontario regulation. The clerk calculates the spending limit twice. Upon a candidate filing their nomination form, the clerk shall calculate the spending limit based on the number of electors on the voters list as it existed September 15th, 2018, the last election. The second calculation is based on the number of electors on the voting list as it exists September 15th, 2022. This calculation must be provided to the candidate on or before September 25th, 2022. And between the two spending limits given to you, whichever the higher is the final amount you are permitted to use. Just again, Sav talked about acquainting yourself with the financial forms and the guides. I reinforce that because things like self-spending limit, general spending limit, expressions of appreciation for parties after voting day spending limits, these are all very different and are expressed in different parts of that financial form. By understanding that, you can organize your campaign and the records you're going to keep. Next slide, please. Spending limits continued. As mentioned in the previous slide, the clerk will provide 2 spending limits to the third-party advertiser as well as a candidate. The higher should be used as the final spending limit. If a third-party advertiser has registered in more than one municipality, each registration is a separate campaign with its own spending limit. And the reason it's different spending limits is there are different numbers of electors in every municipality, and that contributes to the calculation. Therefore, if you are in more than one, registered in more than one municipality, you must submit more than one financial submissions. Each one has to have a separate financial submission. Often, third-party advertisers are registered in several municipalities, and they will contemplate joint purchases to take advantage of bulk orders. This is permitted, however, that joint purchase must be apportioned across each campaign and the financial filing. The campaign finance rules are generally the same for third-party advertisers as they are for candidates. Both are subject to contribution limits and have calculated spending limits. Third-party advertisers are also required to ensure contributions and expenses are tracked and accounted for, proper record retention, and proper direction is provided to those incurring expenses or accepting contributions on their behalf, and that the spending limit is adhered to. Next slide. This slide, expenses not subject to the limit. Most expenses are subject to the spending limit. Those listed on the slides are not. Expenses related to fundraising functions are exempt from the campaign spending limit, but to qualify as a fundraising function, an event must have the raising of money as its primary purpose. I know Sav talked about that, we're reinforcing it. You need to refer to the financial forms. There is a very specific section in Form 4 related to fundraising functions, and you need to express the details that are asked in that particular part of the form. Campaign events which have incidental fundraising taking place, they do not qualify. So if you have a barbecue, you're announcing your platform, and over on the side there's somebody sitting there ready to take any donations, that is not a fundraising function. Similarly, a brochure promoting the awareness of a candidate that contains contact information to make contributions, that does not qualify for a fundraising function. Expenses that were subject to the spending limit, if incurred before voting day, are not subject to the spending limit if incurred after voting day. For example, goods and services. This does not allow you to play with your expenses. If you make a purchase pre-election, you take possession of that inventory, but the invoice does not come in until after the election, you must use it as an expense subject to the spending limit. Next slide, please. Third-party advertisers. Spending limits. The third-party advertiser spending limits are spending limits are similar to candidate spending limits. There is a general limit, and there is a limit for expressions of appreciations and parties after voting day. These will be provided, as we mentioned, by the clerk. I just want to make a comment. Candidates and third-party advertisers have to really think about their parties and expressions of appreciation after voting day. We have had, over the last election and the previous election, situations where people were sent to compliance audit committees and then they were sent to court. And the penalties that they incurred were astronomical. It happens. So you want to be reasonable. You don't want to be, throwing caution to the wind. You want to be reasonable in your expressions of appreciation and your parties. Next slide, please. Campaign finance rules. As a candidate or a third-party advertiser, it's important that you be fully aware of the responsibilities regarding your election spending and accepting campaign contributions. A question that we're quite often asked is, does a candidate have to have a chief financial officer? Because in the provincial and the federal election, in their pieces of legislation surrounding those elections, they do. In a municipal election, you do not require, under the Act, a chief financial officer. In fact, what I'm going to say is you are your own chief financial officer, because if somebody takes you to a compliance audit, you are the ones going to be subject to scrutiny, and you are the ones that may pay a penalty. So, however, if you do have somebody who is assisting you with your finances, what I would suggest you might want to do is to create a procedure document or a guideline to assist those supporting you so that they don't accidentally get you in trouble. Familiarize yourself with the guides and the forms and the Municipal Election Act, and this will help guide you in organizing your records and how they have to be reported. You are required under the Municipal Elections Act to keep accurate records, to open a bank account if you are spending money or accepting contributions. And again, another reminder, a bank account is not required if a candidate or third-party advertiser does not receive or spend money. But you do need to open a bank account if you are self-funding. We have had situations where a candidate and their spouse did not think they had to put their contributions into a campaign account. You do. Do not use a personal account in that situation. Next slide. Campaign finance rules continued. Candidates and third-party advertisers are required to keep complete records and accurate financial statements during the campaign. And we suggest that you do keep it during your campaign. Don't wait until a couple of days before you have to file your financial papers and you realize that you haven't been keeping your records appropriately and you're in a really difficult position and may miss the deadline. All contributions and expenses are to be accounted for and disclosed in the candidate by the candidate on the relevant prescribed forms. All candidates and third-party advertisers are required to keep all financial records until November 15th, 2026, when the new council, so that's the next election. So that's a long time you have to keep the box in your basement, okay? Just a tip. Contributions, campaign income, fundraising events, and spending limits are all treated differently. Make sure you read the guides and the financial forms to be very clear. Another thing, next slide, please. Campaign finance rules continued. Store your receipts in a secured place as they are really valuable documents. A grocery bag may not be the best place. Receipts must be signed by the candidate and his or her designate. It's a good practice to have a receipt that is a multi-part form so that you can give one of the receipts to the contributor and the candidate can keep one of those receipts. Receipts should be sequentially numbered. Again, open a bank account, and we suggest you open one that gives you monthly statements and canceled checks. Produce duplicate deposit slips for every deposit, listing the names of contributors and the amounts received. The other thing you could do is maintain a petty cash fund to handle minor expenses and obtain invoices to support the payments from the fund. At any time, the cash on hand plus the total amount of the invoices should equal the amount of the petty cash fund. The fund can easily be replenished periodically using a campaign account check. Candidates and third-party advertisers may find it useful to look over Form 4 for candidates or Form 8 for third-party advertisers right at the beginning of their campaign. That way you have an understanding of the type of information that you do need to maintain. Next slide, please. Campaign advertising. Candidates and third-party advertisers cannot cause an election campaign advertisement to appear unless they provide the following information listed on this slide to the broadcaster or to the publisher. The period during which third-party advertisements can appear is May 1st, 2022 until the close of voting on voting day, October 24th, 2022. Third-party advertisers and candidates are required to identify themselves on all signs and advertisements. Next slide. Campaign advertising continued. This slide basically talks about record retention for third-party advertisers and broadcasters for advertising purchased. And I'll let you familiarize yourself with that if you are a third-party advertiser. Advertising about an issue rather than a candidate or a yes/no to a question on the ballot is not considered third-party advertising. I'm just reinforcing something that Sav has said. For example, signs saying support local business or keep the waterfront green would not be third-party advertising, even if a candidate has made those particular issues part of their campaign. Next slide, please. Financial statements. All candidates are required to file a Form 4 with the clerk regardless of how much money they spent or fundraised. If you filed a nomination, you must file a Form 4. This form is required even if you withdrew your nomination or you were acclaimed. If you are a registered third-party advertiser, you must complete a Form 8. If a candidate or third-party advertiser feels that they are not going to meet that financial filing deadline, they may apply to the Superior Court of Justice for an extension prior to March 31st, 2023, which is the financial filing deadline. Next slide, please. Financial statements continued. The appointment of an auditor by a candidate is mandatory if expenses or contributions or expenses and contributions exceeds $10,000. So that's $10,001, 1 penny. Auditors must be licensed under the Public Accounting Act, and I would strongly recommend that if you think you're going to be in this position, that you book your auditor early. We had a lot of folks last campaign who were scrambling and very worried that they were going to miss the deadline because there are so few auditors that can do this, and their auditors were so busy, they didn't think they were going to get their materials on time. Again, be diligent, read the Act, read the guides, read the forms, know your responsibilities, and if you need to, seek professional advice, whether it's a lawyer or an accountant. We can certainly answer questions related to the Act and provide you some guidance through the candidate's guide, but there are particular things that we are not able to comment on. Next one, please. Financial statement continued. Candidates can file their financial documents at any time after voting day, January 3rd, and this is adjusted from December 31st because that is a Saturday. Filing the financial statement ends your campaign period. This will make it easier for people who are acclaimed to positions or those campaigns with little or no expenses incurred. You do have to keep in mind that if once you file those financial statements, you can't raise money or spend money. If you are unsure about where you are going to be, wait and take the time you need to know that you've got all of your invoices in, you've got your forms done correctly, you don't need to, or you can wait for your auditor. It's a really important, because once you close your campaign, you can't change anything. Clerks will be required to report whether whether candidates have met their financial filing obligation and publish that report on the municipal website or in another electronic form. This needs to be done by April 30th in the case of a regular election. Next slide, please. The nomination fee is only refundable if the financial statement is filed on time. Again, if a candidate or third-party advertiser feels that they're not going to meet the deadline, they may apply to the courts for an extension prior to that deadline, March 31st, 2023. A candidate or third-party advertiser who misses that filing deadline may file within a 30-day grace period, providing a $500 late filing fee is paid to the municipality. A candidate who chooses to file within that 30-day grace period will be subject to both the $500 late filing fee and as well as lose their nomination refund. A candidate or third-party advertiser may resubmit a financial statement to correct an error up to the filing deadline. So if you submit your financial filing early, before the deadline, and you realize, oh my gosh, an invoice came in late, you still have an opportunity to correct that financial filing and resubmit it up until that deadline. Next slide, surplus. When filing the financial statement, a candidate or third-party advertiser with a campaign surplus must pay the entire amount to the municipal clerk. Prior to paying over any surplus funds to the clerk, a candidate or third-party advertiser is entitled to a refund of any contributions they or their spouse, if an individual, made to the campaign, but no one else. The amount that may be refunded is the lesser of the amount of the relevant contribution or the amount of the surplus. Here's a very simplified example. If your surplus is $100 and you as a candidate contributed $50, you as a candidate or your spouse can take back $50, but the remaining $50 must be turned over to the clerk. The clerk is required to place those surplus funds in trust for use by a candidate or a third-party advertiser if they need it for a compliance audit. If neither the candidate nor the third-party advertiser requires the funds for these purposes, it becomes the property of the municipality or the school board. Next slide, please. Compliance audit. All of this has been leading up to here. Every council and school board must establish a compliance audit committee. Members of the committee cannot be members of council or a school board, an employee, a candidate in the election, or a registered third-party advertiser. Once the financial filing deadline has passed, the clerk will review the contributions reported on the financial forms. They are required to prepare a report for consideration by the Compliance Audit Committee if a contributor appears to have exceeded a contribution limit. So we're not talking about the candidate here. Remember we said we always want you to tell the contributor what their limits are? They can be penalized also. So an elector, this process is not considered part of the compliance audit process. If it's apparent to the clerk that a contributor has exceeded one or more of the contribution limits, the clerk would report this to the committee and they would meet to determine whether to proceed to legal action. An elector who's entitled to vote in an election and believes on reasonable grounds that a candidate has contravened the provisions of the Municipal Elections Act relating to the election campaign finances, they may apply for a compliance audit of the candidate's election campaign finances, even if the candidate has not submitted their financial statements. The application must be in writing, and it must set out the electors' reasons why they believe the Municipal Elections Act was contravened. The application must be submitted to the municipal clerk or to the secretary of the school board within 90 days of the filing deadline. The Compliance Audit Committee will consider the application and decide whether to retain an auditor or to undertake a compliance audit of the candidate's financial return. Next slide, please. Compliance audit continued. What happens after a complaint? Once a complaint has been filed, the Compliance Audit Committee is required to review and provide a brief written reason for its decision related to the review of that financial submission. Do they go to an audit or do they not go to an audit? The Compliance Audit Committee meetings are required to be open to the public, but they are permitted to deliberate in private. The written reasons for the committee's decision shall be given to the candidate, the clerk whom the candidate filed his or her nominations, the secretary of the local board, if applicable, and the applicant. If an audit occurs, the auditor's report will be circulated to the same individuals. The Audit Committee considers the audit report. If the Compliance Audit Committee determines that there is an apparent contravention of the Municipal Elections Act, the committee will decide whether to proceed to legal action. Decisions of the committee may be appealed to the Superior Court of Justice. A person who believes that a candidate has contravened the Municipal Elections Act may proceed with legal action without having first obtained a compliance audit. So again, just a little tip. Run your campaign and keep your records like you know you are going to a compliance audit. That way you know you have everything in order. Next slide, please. Offenses. The Municipal Elections Act sets out an offense constituting a corrupt practice. A corrupt practice is something very different than a complaint to the Compliance Audit Committee. A corrupt practice is criminal and is handled by a special unit of the OPP. And we did have such an investigation in the last election. It did not result in any charges, but it took about 6 to 8 months. So it was a very in-depth investigation. Next slide, please. This slide lists some of the penalties that you could face as an individual, candidate, or third-party advertiser if you contravene the Municipal Elections Act. Next slide, please. Voters list. A preliminary list of electors, as corrected by the clerk, becomes the voters list September 1st, 2022. The clerk determines how and when individuals can apply to have their name and their information corrected, added, or removed from the voters list. The clerk can also remove a name if the clerk becomes aware that the person has passed away. Next slide, please. Voters list continued. Candidates running in a ward are entitled to only the portion of the list that contains the name of the electors entitled to vote in that particular office. The voters list shall not be posted in a public place and shall not be made available to the public by posting it on an internet website or via any other print or electronic medium of mass communications. Third-party advertisers are not eligible to get a copy of the voters list. Next slide, please. Voters list continued. The clerk may require anyone who receives a copy of this list to sign a receipt acknowledging the list is only to be used for elections purposes, and any other use would be a violation of the Municipal Elections Act. Next slide, please. Voting proxy. Eligible electors can appoint another person who is also an eligible elector to vote on their behalf. There are several reasons why someone would appoint someone else to vote on their behalf, including absences from the country, illnesses, any number of other things. This is done through a proxy form, which is certified by the clerk, and the clerk may designate the place and time in which this certification can occur. However, no appointments can be made until nominations are closed. An eligible proxy voter can only exercise one proxy vote unless the proxy is acting on behalf of a spouse, sibling, parent, child, grandparent, or grandchild, in which case it can be more than one. Municipalities that use alternate voting, such as telephone or internet voting, may choose not to include proxy voting. Next slide, please. Scrutineers. Candidates, but not third-party advertisers, may appoint scrutineers to represent him or her during the voting, during the counting of the votes, and during a recount. Scrutineers may observe, but they are not allowed to interfere with the voters, attempt to influence how they vote, or ask them how they voted. In a traditional election where voting takes place in a poll, the DRO oversees the activity in the voting place, and the DRO may ask a scrutineer to leave if the scrutineer is not complying with legislation. Candidates and scrutineers should respect the DRO, as they must ensure fairness, access, privacy, and security of the vote. Interestingly, there are no age restrictions related to appointing a scrutineer, but I would caution you to think about the person you choose is going to be representing you. They need to understand the importance of the voting location and voting and the campaign. And so and anything they do is going to reflect back on you. So you want to think about who you are going to make a scrutineer. Next slide, please. Recounts. A recount is automatic if the vote is tied. Councils and school boards have the option of establishing policies prior to the election that also allow for an automatic recount. Council still retains the option to pass a resolution for a recount within 30 days after the clerk has declared the results of the election. An eligible elector can apply to the courts for a recount within 30 days of the clerk's declaration of the results. Next slide, please. Key dates. Just going to quickly go through a couple of these, or 4 of these. Voting day, as you know, hopefully, is Monday, October 24th, 2022, between 10 a.m. and 10 p.m., unless reduced hours are set out in a bylaw for retirement homes and institutions, or council has passed a bylaw to open voting earlier than 10 a.m. The candidate's campaign period, the time in which the campaign can accept contributions or incur expenses, runs from the date the nomination is submitted up until January 3rd, 2023. The third-party advertiser campaign period, the time the third-party advertiser can incur expenses, begins the date their registration is certified, and the earliest date would be May 1st, 2022, until January 3rd, 2023. The deadline for filing of campaign financial statements in the clerk's office is Friday, March 31st, 2023, no later than 2 p.m. And again, you've heard us talk a lot about dates and times. You want to really pay attention to the times. People automatically assume everything is going to be associated to a business day, 4 o'clock. There are a lot of deadlines that are 2 p.m., so pay attention to those. Next slide, please. And this slide basically outlines to you some of the resources that we've been talking about, some links to those resources. I'm just going to let you familiarize yourself with them. This deck, with a correction for Muskoka, sorry, will be posted, will be sent to Holly and shared with everybody, and you can refer to those. So next slide, please, Saf. So we've now concluded the presentation. I know it is a lot of information, probably more than you thought was going to be presented. And just think, nobody started talking about what a councillor or a third-party advertiser or a school board trustee's job is. It's pretty big too. We will be taking questions, and I think we're going to take some from the floor, and I believe there may have been some emails sent through to Pelham. Is that, thank you.
Currently there are no emails, but anybody at home can email us at clerk@pelham.ca.
Okay, anybody at home can email clerk@pelham.ca, and send in questions, and they will get them to us and we will respond. Clerks with an S, excuse me. Clerks with an S. It's the mask. Any questions? I'm going to get you to stand up and be really loud, and I will probably repeat the question for the purposes of the streaming.
You had mentioned that the Municipal Act had really updated methods of contributions, so you can do an e-transfer through a bank for a contribution?
Okay, I said the Municipal Elections Act has not kept up. So you have to be able to show receipting, so name, address, where the money came from. We are hearing from some people that e-transfers may not show enough information that will be required. So again, I don't know should I go through those guidelines again? Okay, first of all, I am going to apologize. I didn't repeat the question. The question was related to the Municipal Elections Act, keeping up with the new electronic financial methods, and the answer was no, it has not. We have provided some guidelines, and I'm just going to go to my book and grab that information. Okay, so I'm going to go through these tips again. We're often asked how candidates should treat credit card purchases. When making credit card purchases, you need to keep notes and clear records showing that the expense on the credit card was reimbursed from the campaign account. PayPal and GoFundMe, these are guidelines because it is not covered by the Act, but the question about e-transfers, the concepts are still the same, okay? Candidates are responsible for keeping complete records for each contribution. And when we say complete records, you must comply with the financial filing and the obligations of the Act. They should be able to demonstrate that they have complied with the financial campaign rules should they be subject to a compliance audit. If any payments made via PayPal, check, whatever format, are anonymous and you cannot verify the receipting information, these payments are ineligible and need to be turned over to the clerk. Candidates will need to ensure all contributors are eligible and all contributions come from individuals who reside in Ontario, not from corporations or trade unions, and you must be able to verify the details that are required for receipt. So again, those are the guidelines I can provide you. You may need to go get further advice from a professional and then eventually make that decision for yourself. Okay. Go ahead.
So you talked about reusing signs and stuff from previous campaign, and it has to be documented as an expense. Now, where do you document that as income? Does that come from a contribution then from the candidate because they technically own that, or like how do you balance that off then?
So the question was about signs or goods from a previous election. How are they reflected in the financial form? It is as if you went out and purchased it, so it is only reflected as an expense. But you can get, you can go to, so the question was you won't necessarily have a receipt, but what you can do is go to a sign maker and say, can you tell me how much this many signs would be, and that would be your proof.
Okay, but then you won't have a payment showing it coming out of your account either, so you don't have to. Like,
Just to let, yeah.
To reconcile that, like if you have,
Okay.
let's say $5,000 in contributions, and then you've taken $2,000 as your signs that you already had in the account, so
The question is about the balancing. Should there be a contribution and expense? And I'm just going to tell you, the financial forms are not a balance sheet. Do not try to balance them. Yep. Yeah.
Is there any issue when it comes to signs that if I want a business card, like an actual business card, on one side and the election information on the other side, can I hand that out?
The question is related to signs, and it is if I have, and please tell me if I've got this wrong, if I have a sign and I want to have a business card in it.
No, an actual business card.
Yep.
For my business, but I want to put the election information on the back. Is that acceptable?
That is a contribution from a corporation, and candidates are not allowed to accept contributions from corporations or trade unions. The other issue of signs is that is regulated by the municipalities. So you have two things that you need to reconcile. One, the contribution piece and does it work? And you need to go to your municipality and understand requirements related to signage. So that's about as much as I think. Do you have?
Follow up on that?
Sure.
Okay. Does it make a difference if I'm self-employed, sole proprietor?
I'm not going to make a comment. I'm not an accountant. I can't go there. Yeah. It's a corporate. In the Act, corporations and trade unions cannot contribute to a candidate. I can't get into the minutia of where a sole proprietor sits in all of those types of things. Yeah.
Then one more question, if I can.
Yep.
On the election sign, am I permitted to say, vote John Smith, the owner of ABC Enterprises, for council?
I think you will need to look to your local municipality's sign requirements, and again, consider the Municipal Elections Act and the contribution and the corporation piece. I can't comment. Yeah. Sorry, Holly, do you want to?
Yes, we received an email asking how can a candidate apply for an extension to the deadline for filing a financial statement?
So the question is, how can a candidate file for an extension to the campaign deadline? And that is through the Superior Court of Justice. So they will need to make an inquiry with the Superior Court of Justice how to do that. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I just have a question about signs. It's not really signs, though. It's decals you put on your car. So in municipality, rather, they have a sign by law or regulation. But you want to put over your sharp on like the visor, strip of my vehicle. It's not considered a sign, is it?
The question was decaling or wrapping a vehicle. Is that considered a sign? And you will have to go to your local municipality and have a look at their sign rules and regulations. I do know that there are more and more municipalities that are allowing that, but there are restrictions with regard to where that vehicle eventually ends up getting parked. Not on municipal property, not at a voting place, those types of things. But again, I would send you to your municipality to get that answer. Again, just to let folks know who are on the live stream, it's clerks@pelham.ca if you want to submit a question.
If I could just get clarification about the rule about your people who donate services to you. So it only counts as a contribution if they generally get paid for doing that task. So if I have a friend who's really good at web design but doesn't do it for a living, can they do
Do they declare anything on their income tax related to that service? Well, I'm not saying that's a cutoff. I'm saying that's a question you might want to ask. So the question was, related to volunteer professional contributions. If I have somebody who doesn't necessarily make a full income on doing something like web design, can they donate it to me and be considered a volunteer? And my response was, you need to be absolutely sure that this is not a professional. They don't receive funds. They don't reflect it potentially on an income tax form or submission. And again, when in doubt, you may want to consult a professional. Okay, so the question is, if I post a board, what is a sign? A sign at a business?
At their own business, or somebody else's business, does that count as a corporate endorsement?
So, again, I think I'm going to first defer to the sign bylaw because there may be rules and regulations as to where and how signs are permitted to be posted. And again, I think, people can, promote. If it's a sign, there's no cost involved, there's no contribution, I would think that is okay. I'm looking, yeah. Not unless I'm getting any different statements or comments from, okay, thank you. Any other questions? Yep.
One more question. Social media. So let's say I don't pay for the social media, but I'm posting things on there. What are the rules about social media? Maybe that's
because posting on social media doesn't... Oh, sorry. The question was... Sorry, what was the question?
My question was fairly general. What are the rules about social media?
It was the wording. What are the rules about posting on social media? So because if that's free, then that's perfectly okay. You can post away. But if you do pay for... there's sometimes boosts that you can do to boost your whatever you're posting, then you would have to include that, and that would count as an expense. But as long as it's free, then it's fine. Any other questions? No? Are we good?
Again, those of you who are live streaming, clerks at pelham.ca. We'll just give that one last chance. So thank you very much for patiently listening, and I didn't hear any snoring, so that is also a really good sign. Thank you. And I wish you luck in your campaigns. It is, I think, as Sav and I said several million times, if you familiarize yourself with those guides, they're very well written, have lots of really good examples, and the forms, and you call us if you have questions. Sometimes we will have to defer back to a professional, but we will do our best. We might be able to give you some examples for you to consider and then make a final decision. But good luck, folks. Thank you.
On behalf of the Niagara municipalities, I would like to thank the province for the presentation and for attending this session. Please note this presentation and a recording will be posted on the Town of Pelham's website and will also be shared with all municipalities and the region. Finally, I would like to thank everyone for attending and for your interest in the upcoming election. Thank you very much.